The silver moon hung low over the dusty plains of Nevada Territory as Theodora Jenkins rode into the town of Silver Creek, her shadow stretching long before her like the rumors that had chased her across 3 states. It was 1876, and she had nowhere left to run. The town's wooden structures loomed against the darkening sky, promising shelter but not sanctuary, never that, not for someone like her. Theodora dismounted with practiced ease, her worn boots stirring up dust in the street. At 24, she carried herself with a weariness beyond her years, her amber eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, a few tendrils escaping to frame a face that rarely smiled anymore. "Madam, need help with your horse." A boy of about 12 appeared at her side. "I can manage," Theodora replied, her voice soft but firm. She pulled her saddlebags from her mare and pressed a coin into the boy's palm anyway. "But if you could point me toward a room for the night, I'd be grateful." "Widow Hartley takes in boarders, end of the street. Tell her Tommy sent you." The boy pocketed the coin with a gap-toothed grin and scampered off. Theodora led her mare to the livery first, arranging for her care before making her way to the boarding house. Each step was measured, careful. Silver Creek seemed peaceful enough, but she'd learned the hard way that appearances deceived. Widow Hartley was a stern-faced woman with kind eyes who asked few questions, a blessing Theodora hadn't expected. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the main street. "Supper's at 6 sharp," the widow informed her. "Don't be late or you'll go hungry till breakfast." Theodora nodded, grateful for the woman's directness. "I'll be there." Alone in her room, she unpacked her meager possessions, a change of clothes, a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, a small derringer she kept wrapped in a handkerchief, and a tarnished silver locket containing a faded photograph of her parents. She placed the book on the nightstand, tucked the gun under her pillow, and hung the locket around her neck. The supper bell rang precisely at 6. Theodora descended to find 4 other boarders already seated, a schoolteacher, an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as the town's former mayor, a young woman who worked at the general store, and a man who kept his head down and said nothing. The meal passed in polite conversation that Theodora barely followed. She answered direct questions with vague pleasantries and avoided revealing anything substantial about herself. By the time dessert was served, she had established the persona she would wear in Silver Creek, a widow passing through, perhaps staying a while if she found work. It wasn't until the following morning that she encountered him. Theodora had risen early, hoping to explore the town before most residents were about. The main street was quiet, save for a few shopkeepers opening their establishments and a tall figure emerging from the sheriff's office. She wouldn't have paid him much mind, except that he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw her, his expression shifting from casual interest to something more intense. Theodora froze, her hand instinctively moving toward the small knife concealed in her boot. "You're new in town," he said, his voice deep and steady. It wasn't a question. "Just passing through," she replied, trying to step around him. He moved slightly to block her path, not threateningly, but with a deliberateness that made her heart race. "Most folks passing through don't arrive alone after sunset." Theodora straightened her spine. "I wasn't aware there were rules about when one could arrive in Silver Creek." A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He was handsome in a weathered way, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and a strong jawline shadowed by stubble. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, worn denim, boots with spurs, a gun belt resting low on his hips. "No rules," he said, tipping his hat. "Just observations." "Name's Matthew North. I work for Sheriff Calloway." Theodora hesitated before offering. "Theodora Jenkins." "Mrs. Jenkins?" he asked, his gaze dropping briefly to her left hand, which bore no ring. "Miss," she corrected, then immediately regretted the admission. "Good day, Mr. North." She brushed past him, feeling his eyes on her back as she hurried toward the general store. It wasn't the first time a man had looked at her with interest, but something about Matthew North unsettled her, not with fear, but with a different kind of danger altogether. Over the next week, Theodora established a routine in Silver Creek. She secured part-time work at the town's small library, cataloging books and helping the elderly librarian, Mrs. Finch. The position paid little, but offered her a quiet place to hide among the shelves. She took her meals at the boarding house and kept to herself, declining invitations to church socials or town gatherings. Yet no matter how she tried to remain invisible, Matthew North seemed to materialize wherever she went. He'd tip his hat when they passed on the street, inquire about her day when she visited the general store. And once, when a sudden thunderstorm caught her without shelter, he appeared with an umbrella and walked her to the boarding house without saying a word. His attentions were respectful but persistent, and Theodora found herself both dreading and anticipating their encounters. She told herself it was foolish, dangerous, even to allow any attachment to form. Her past had taught her the consequences of such indulgences. One evening, as summer heat gave way to a cool autumn breeze, Theodora sat on the boarding house porch, reading by the last of the daylight. The sound of approaching footsteps made her glance up to find Matthew North standing at the bottom step, his hat in his hands. "Evening, Miss Jenkins," he said, a hesitant smile playing at his lips. Theodora marked her page and closed her book. "Mr. North, I was wondering if you might join me for supper tomorrow at the hotel restaurant." He spoke the words quickly, as if he'd rehearsed them. "They serve a fine roast on Saturdays." Theodora's instinct was to refuse immediately, but something in his expression and earnestness, a vulnerability beneath the confident exterior, made her pause. "I don't think that would be wise." "Why not?" he asked, taking a step closer. "Is it something I said or did?" "No," she admitted. "You've been nothing but a gentleman." "Then why?" His directness was refreshing in a world where most people danced around uncomfortable truths. Theodora struggled with how to respond. The real reasons were too complex, too dangerous to share. Instead, she offered a partial truth. "I'm not looking for entanglements." Matthew studied her for a long moment. "Fair enough," he finally said, replacing his hat. "But my offer stands should you change your mind." He turned to leave, and Theodora felt an unexpected pang of regret. "Mr. North," she called after him. He looked back, hope flashing across his features. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding." He nodded once, then continued down the street. Theodora watched him go, wondering if she'd made the right choice. Safety lay in solitude. She'd learned that lesson through blood and tears. Yet as she retreated to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had slipped through her fingers. The following day brought an unexpected development. While shelving books at the library, Theodora overheard Mrs. Finch speaking with Sheriff Calloway in hushed tones near the entrance. "Asking about a young woman matching her description," the sheriff was saying. "Claimed to be her brother, but something didn't sit right." Theodora's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the bookshelf, straining to hear more. "She seems a respectable young lady," Mrs. Finch replied. "Keeps to herself, works hard. I can't imagine she's running from the law." "Didn't say she was," the sheriff clarified. "But I thought you should know someone's looking for her. Tall fellow, expensive suit, scar across his right cheek." Theodora nearly dropped the book she was holding. Richard Hunt had found her trail again. She'd hoped the false leads she'd planted would buy her more time, but Hunt was nothing if not persistent. She waited until the sheriff left before emerging from the stacks, her mind racing. She would need to leave immediately, before Hunt arrived in person. The thought brought both terror and a wrenching disappointment. Despite her caution, she'd grown fond of Silver Creek, of Mrs. Finch and Widow Hartley, of the rhythm of small-town life, and of Matthew North, though she couldn't afford to dwell on that particular regret. Theodora finished her shift with mechanical efficiency, then returned to the boarding house to pack her few belongings. She would leave at first light, heading west toward California. Perhaps there, in the chaos of San Francisco, she might finally disappear completely. As she folded her spare dress into her saddlebag, a soft knock came at her door. She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her derringer. "Miss Jenkins, it's Matthew North." Theodora exhaled slowly, tucking the gun back under her pillow before opening the door a crack. "Mr. North, this isn't appropriate." "I know," he said, his expression grave, "but I need to speak with you. It's important." She hesitated, then opened the door wider, allowing him to step into her room. Propriety be damned, she would be gone by morning anyway. Matthew removed his hat, his gaze immediately falling on her packed saddlebags. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question, so Theodora didn't treat it as one. "What did you need to speak with me about?" He ran a hand through his hair, mussing it in a way that made him look younger, less certain. "Sheriff told me someone came looking for you. Man with a scar." Theodora's chest tightened. "And you came to warn me." "I came to help you," he corrected. "Whatever trouble you're in, you know nothing about the trouble I'm in," she interrupted, her voice sharper than intended. "Then tell me," he urged, taking a step closer. "I've known from the moment I saw you that you were running from something. Let me help." Theodora laughed bitterly. "No one can help me, Mr. North. The man looking for me won't stop until he finds me, and when he does." She trailed off, unable to voice the fate that awaited her. "Who is he?" Matthew pressed. Theodora sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets. "His name is Richard Hunt. He's a wealthy rancher from Texas. I was engaged to his son, James." Matthew's brow furrowed. "And he's hunting you because you broke the engagement." "James is dead," Theodora said flatly. "And his father believes I'm responsible." Understanding dawned in Matthew's eyes. "Are you?" She met his gaze directly. "No." "James was murdered by his own father when he discovered the man's illegal dealings. I witnessed it. Now Hunt wants to ensure I never testify against him." Matthew was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. "Have you gone to the authorities?" "I tried," Theodora said, the memory bitter on her tongue. "Hunt has connections, judges, lawmen, politicians. The first marshal I approached was dead within a week. The second tried to arrest me on false charges. I've been running ever since." "How long?" 18 months, she answered, the admission leaving her hollow. "I've changed my name, my appearance. I've crossed 4 state lines, but he always finds me." Matthew paced the small room, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "You can't keep running forever." "I don't have a choice," Theodora countered, rising to continue her packing. Matthew caught her wrist gently. "You do, stay. Let me help you face him." The warmth of his touch sent an unexpected shiver through her. She pulled away. "You don't understand what he's capable of. Anyone who helps me ends up dead." "I can take care of myself," Matthew insisted. "And I'm not alone. Sheriff Calloway is a good man, and we have connections of our own." Theodora shook her head, unwilling to risk another life on her behalf. "I've heard such promises before. They all ended in graves." Matthew studied her face, his expression softening. "You care what happens to me," he realized. "I care what happens to anyone foolish enough to stand in Hunt's way," she deflected, turning away to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "Theodora," he said, the first time he'd used her given name. "Look at me," she did, reluctantly. "I've spent my life fighting men like Hunt," Matthew said, his voice low and intense. "Before I came to Silver Creek, I rode with the Texas Rangers. I've faced down killers and thieves, corrupt officials and cattle barons who thought they were above the law." Surprise flickered across Theodora's features. The quiet, persistent cowboy who'd been courting her had depths she hadn't suspected. "Hunt isn't the first powerful man to think he can buy justice," Matthew continued, "but he can't buy everyone. Not here." For the first time in months, a fragile hope bloomed in Theodora's chest. "Even if what you say is true, I can't ask you to risk your life." "You're not asking," Matthew replied, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "I'm offering." The sincerity in his eyes weakened her resolve. "Why, you barely know me," Matthew's smile faltered. "I know enough. I know you're brave and kind, even though life's given you reasons to be neither. I know you help Mrs. Finch with tasks well beyond your duties. I know you slip extra coins to the orphans who beg outside the general store when you think no one's looking." Theodora blinked, astonished that he'd noticed such things. "And I know," he continued, his voice dropping, "that from the moment I saw you, I couldn't get you out of my mind." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Theodora felt something crack within her, the protective shell she'd built around her heart. A commotion outside interrupted her. Shouts and the sound of galloping horses drew them both to the window. 4 riders had pulled up in front of the boarding house, led by a tall man in an expensive suit. "Hunt," Theodora whispered, fear clawing at her throat. "He's here." Matthew's hand moved to his gun. "Stay here, lock the door." "No," she grabbed his arm. "You don't understand, he'll kill you without hesitation." "Then we'll leave together," Matthew decided, helping her gather her belongings. "There's a back way through the kitchen." "We'll take my horse, it's faster with two." They slipped downstairs as quietly as possible, avoiding the creaking third step. The kitchen was mercifully empty, the cook having gone home for the evening. They could hear Hunt's voice from the front parlor, demanding to know Theodora's whereabouts. Widow Hartley's reply was inaudible, but her tone suggested she was being deliberately unhelpful. Theodora sent a silent prayer of thanks for the woman's instinctive protectiveness. Matthew led her through the back door and across the yard to where his horse was hitched. The gelding was a powerful animal, well suited for speed. Matthew helped Theodora mount, then swung up behind her. "Where to?" he murmured close to her ear. "Sheriff's office," Theodora decided. "If your faith in him is justified, it's our best chance." Matthew nodded, spurring the horse into motion. They kept to the alleyways, avoiding the main street where Hunt's men might spot them. The sheriff's office was on the opposite end of town, past the saloon and the bank. They had almost reached it when a shout went up behind them. One of Hunt's men had spotted them and was giving chase. "Hold on," Matthew warned, urging his horse to greater speed. They thundered down the street, drawing the attention of the few people still out at this hour. Matthew's horse was fast, but the pursuit was gaining. A shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past Theodora's ear. She felt Matthew tense behind her. "Are you hit?" she asked frantically. "No," he assured her, guiding the horse around a sharp corner. "Almost there." The sheriff's office came into view, its windows glowing with lamplight. Matthew pulled the horse to a sliding stop and helped Theodora dismount. They burst through the door to find Sheriff Calloway at his desk, startled by their abrupt entrance. "North, what's the meaning of no time?" Matthew interrupted. "Richard Hunt is in town with at least 3 gunmen. He's after Miss Jenkins." The sheriff's expression hardened as he rose from his desk. "The man with the scar." "Yes," Theodora confirmed. "He murdered his own son and will kill anyone who stands in his way." Calloway assessed her with shrewd eyes, then nodded. "I suspected there was more to his inquiries than brotherly concern." He reached for his shotgun. "North, get her to the cells in back. Safest place for now." Matthew led Theodora through a door behind the sheriff's desk to a small cell block with 3 cells, all empty. He unlocked one and ushered her inside. "I'll be right outside," he promised, his hand lingering on hers. Theodora nodded, trying to control her trembling. This was the closest Hunt had ever come to catching her, and now she'd drawn others into her nightmare. From the front office, they heard the door open and close, followed by the sheriff's deceptively calm greeting. "Evening, gentlemen. Something I can help you with?" "I'm looking for a young woman," came a cultured voice that sent ice through Theodora's veins. "Theodora Jenkins." "I have reason to believe she's in your town." "And your interest in her?" Calloway asked, his tone neutral. "She's wanted for questioning regarding my son's murder," Hunt replied smoothly. "I have papers from a judge in Austin." There was a rustling sound as documents changed hands. "These seem in order," the sheriff admitted after a moment, "but I'm afraid I can't help you. Haven't seen anyone matching this description." "My men saw her entering this office not 5 minutes ago," Hunt countered, his voice hardening. "Along with that deputy of yours." Matthew tensed beside Theodora, his hand moving to his gun. "You're mistaken," Calloway insisted. "Now, if there's nothing else, it's late and I've paperwork to finish." A tense silence followed, broken by the unmistakable sound of a hammer being cocked. "I don't think you understand, Sheriff," Hunt said silkily. "I'm not leaving without her." "And I don't think you understand," Calloway replied, his voice like steel. "This is my town. You'll abide by my law while you're in it." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats before Hunt spoke again. "Very well, we'll do this officially. I want to file a formal complaint about a fugitive in your jurisdiction." "You're welcome to do so in the morning," Calloway said. "Office opens at 8. Another silence, then the sound of retreating footsteps. "This isn't over," Hunt warned from the doorway. "I expect not," the sheriff agreed. "Good evening, Mr. Hunt." The door closed, and Theodora released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Matthew squeezed her hand reassuringly before returning to the front office. He'll be back with more men, Matthew said, his voice low. I know, Calloway sighed. Those papers were genuine enough, but something's not right. A judge wouldn't issue an order for a civilian to apprehend a murder suspect. Hunt has judges in his pocket, Theodora explained, joining them. He's been using legal means to hunt me across 3 states. The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We need to get word to the federal marshal in Carson City. This is beyond local jurisdiction if what you're saying is true. It is, Theodora affirmed. I witnessed him shoot his son in the back when James confronted him about selling stolen cattle. The problem is keeping you safe until the marshal arrives, Calloway mused. Hunt won't wait patiently. He knows you're here now. I have an idea, Matthew interjected. My brother's ranch is about 15 miles north. It's remote, defensible, and Thomas always has a few hands around who know how to handle trouble. Calloway nodded slowly. That could work. I'll send word to Carson City, then join you at the ranch once I've arranged for Deputy Wilson to watch the town. We'll need to leave immediately, Matthew said, turning to Theodora. Are you up for another ride? She nodded, her resolve strengthening. For the first time since she'd witnessed James's murder, she wasn't facing the danger alone. Yes. They left through the back door, where Matthew had moved his horse. This time they rode harder, taking less traveled paths through the scrubland. Theodora clung to Matthew's waist, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the warmth of his body against hers providing an unexpected comfort. The moon was high overhead by the time they reached the North Ranch, a sprawling property with a 2-story main house and several outbuildings. Lights blazed from the windows despite the late hour. Thomas North was cut from the same cloth as his brother, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same intense eyes, though his hair was lighter. He greeted them at the door with a raised eyebrow but asked no questions when Matthew quickly explained the situation. Any friend of Matt's is welcome here, Thomas assured Theodora, leading them inside. Especially one in trouble. We've dealt with men like Hunt before. He settled them in the kitchen where his wife, Sarah, a practical-looking woman with kind eyes, served them hot coffee and leftover stew. I'll have the hands keep watch in shifts, Thomas said, pulling on his coat. Sarah, show Miss Jenkins to the guest room when she's ready. As the brothers stepped outside to make arrangements, Sarah gave Theodora a sympathetic smile. You must be exhausted. Eat, then I'll show you where you can rest. Theodora managed a few bites, though her stomach was knotted with anxiety. Thank you for your hospitality. Matthew doesn't bring many people here, Sarah observed, refilling Theodora's coffee cup. You must be special. Theodora blushed. We barely know each other. Sarah's smile widened. Sometimes that doesn't matter much. I knew Thomas was the one for me within a week of meeting him. Before Theodora could respond, Matthew returned, his face grim. Thomas has the men positioned. We should be safe for the night, but Hunt's not the type to give up easily. Sarah excused herself to prepare the guest room, leaving them alone in the warmth of the kitchen. Matthew sat across from Theodora, his fingers drumming restlessly on the table. I'm sorry for bringing this danger to your family, Theodora said softly. Matthew shook his head. Don't be, Thomas and I have faced worse. Still, if anything happened to them because of me. Nothing will happen, he assured her, reaching across to still her trembling hands with his. We'll get through this, and then Hunt will face justice for what he's done. Theodora wanted desperately to believe him. And after, what then? Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, hope, perhaps, or a more complex emotion she couldn't name. After is up to you. But I'd like it if you stayed in Silver Creek. The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Theodora withdrew her hands gently. Matthew, I can't offer you any promises. For 18 months, I haven't thought beyond survival. I'm not asking for promises, he said. Just a chance. Before she could respond, Sarah returned to show Theodora to her room. It was small but comfortable, with a quilt-covered bed and a washstand. A nightgown had been laid out, slightly too large but clean. Try to get some rest, Sarah advised. The men will keep watch. Left alone, Theodora washed and changed, then sat on the edge of the bed, too wired to sleep. The events of the day replayed in her mind, particularly the moments with Matthew. His unwavering support, his determination to help her despite the danger, The warmth in his eyes when he spoke of her staying in Silver Creek, all of it tugged at something long dormant within her. She'd closed herself off from such possibilities after James's death, convinced that attachment meant vulnerability. But Matthew had shown her another perspective, that sometimes facing danger alone was more vulnerable than facing it with someone at your side. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Matthew, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said. But Thomas spotted riders approaching from the south. "It's likely Hunt." Theodora's heart raced. "So soon? How did he find us?" "Probably followed our trail," Matthew surmised. "He's determined, I'll give him that." "What do we do?" she asked, reaching for her clothes. "Thomas is sending Sarah and the housekeeper to the line cabin half a mile east. You should go with them." Theodora shook her head firmly. "No, I'm done running, done putting others in danger for me." "This ends tonight." Matthew studied her face, recognizing the resolve in her eyes. "It's not safe. It's never been safe," she countered. "But I'll no longer hide while others fight my battles." A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. "You're remarkable, Theodora Jenkins." She flushed at the admiration in his voice. "I'm just tired of being afraid." They returned to the kitchen where Thomas was distributing rifles to 4 ranch hands. He raised an eyebrow at Theodora's presence but didn't comment. 8 riders approaching from the south ridge, he reported. Moving cautiously but definitely headed this way. Hunt must have gathered more men in town, Matthew said grimly. He's not taking chances this time. Neither are we, Thomas replied, checking his revolver. The hands are positioned around the house. We have the advantage of terrain and shelter. Matthew turned to Theodora. Stay inside, away from the windows. If shooting starts, I know how to use a gun, she interrupted. When both brothers looked surprised, she added, James taught me, I'm not helpless. Thomas handed her a loaded revolver without comment. Basement door is through the pantry if you need it. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Lamps were extinguished, positions assigned, ammunition distributed. Theodora helped where she could, loading spare revolvers and preparing bandages from torn sheets, just in case. The attack, when it came, was sudden and violent. A volley of shots shattered the pre-dawn silence, followed by the sound of galloping hooves. The North brothers and their men returned fire from protected positions, the exchange intensifying as Hunt's men tried to approach the house from multiple directions. Theodora crouched behind an overturned table, the revolver steady in her hand. She wasn't eager to kill, but she would defend herself and these people who had risked so much for her. A window shattered nearby, and she heard a man cry out in pain. One of the ranch hands had been hit. Matthew dragged him to safety while Thomas provided covering fire. The firefight continued, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Then, during a lull, a cultured voice called out from the darkness. Theodora, I know you're in there. Come out now, and no one else needs to get hurt. She froze, Richard Hunt's voice sending ice through her veins. Matthew placed a warning hand on her arm, but she shook her head. It's time to end this, she whispered. Before he could stop her, Theodora moved to the front door. I'm here, Hunt, she called back. But I'm not coming out. You murdered your son, and I'm not your only witness anymore. Hunt's laugh was cold. You think anyone will believe you, a woman alone running from town to town? I have judges, marshals, and governors in my pocket. Not all of them, she countered. And I'm not alone anymore. As if to emphasize her point, a new sound joined the fray, hoofbeats approaching from the east, multiple riders moving fast. Moments later, Sheriff Calloway's voice rang out. Richard Hunt. This is Sheriff Calloway with Deputy United States Marshal Johnson. You and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons. A tense silence followed, broken by a single shot, then another. Theodora flinched, fearing the worst, but the ensuing commotion suggested Hunt had turned on one of his own men before trying to flee. The next few minutes were chaos, shouts, more gunfire, the thunder of hooves. Then, finally, silence. Matthew cautiously opened the door, rifle ready. Sheriff Calloway approached the house, a grim satisfaction on his face. We got him, he announced. Hunt's dead. Tried to shoot the marshal when he was cornered. Theodora sagged against the doorframe, 18 months of fear and running suddenly lifted from her shoulders. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. Dawn was breaking as they sorted through the aftermath. 2 of Hunt's men had been killed, 3 wounded, and the rest captured. 1 ranch hand had a minor injury, but everyone else at the North Ranch had escaped unscathed. Marshal Johnson, a weathered man with a no-nonsense demeanor, took Theodora's full statement about James's murder and Hunt's subsequent pursuit. He assured her that, with Hunt dead and her testimony, the remaining conspirators would be brought to justice. "You're free to go where you please now, Miss Jenkins," he told her when they'd finished, "though if I might say so, you seem to have found good people here." Theodora glanced at Matthew, who was helping tend to the wounded ranch hand. "Yes," she agreed softly, "I have." As the marshal and sheriff prepared to transport their prisoners back to Silver Creek, Theodora found a moment alone with Matthew on the front porch. The early morning light gilded the landscape, promising a beautiful day ahead. "What will you do now?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Theodora considered the question. For so long, her only thought had been survival, escape. Now, possibilities stretched before her like the open prairie. "I think," she said slowly, "I might stay in Silver Creek. The library position suits me, and Mrs. Finch mentioned she's considering retirement." Matthew's expression brightened. "You'd make a fine librarian. And you," she asked, suddenly shy, "will you continue as deputy sheriff, for now?" He nodded. "Though Thomas has been after me to help him run the ranch, says he's getting too old for the day-to-day work." They fell silent, the unspoken hovering between them. Theodora gathered her courage. "Matthew, before all this happened, you asked me to supper if the offer still stands." His smile was like sunrise. "It does." "Then I accept," she said, returning his smile. They rode back to Silver Creek later that day, side by side on separate horses borrowed from Thomas. The journey was peaceful, giving them time to talk more openly than ever before. Theodora shared stories of her life before Hunt's pursued, her childhood in St. Louis, her love of books, her brief happiness with James before discovering the darkness in his father. Matthew spoke of his years with the Rangers, the toll it had taken, and the satisfaction of bringing order to chaos. He told her about his dreams for the future, eventually taking over part of his brother's ranch, building a home of his own, perhaps starting a family. By the time they reached Silver Creek, something had shifted between them, a deepening connection, a shared understanding of what might be possible. Life gradually returned to normal in the small town, though normal for Theodora now included regular suppers with Matthew, walks along the creek on Sunday afternoons, and the growing certainty that her heart was no longer entirely her own. 2 months after Hunt's death, they sat together on the bank of Silver Creek, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Theodora had received word that the last of Hunt's conspirators had been arrested, closing the final chapter of her ordeal. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she confessed, trailing her fingers through the cool water. "Like I'm really free." Matthew took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her despite the evening chill. "You deserve that freedom. You've earned it through fire and blood." Theodora turned to face him, suddenly overcome with emotion. "There were so many times I thought I'd never know peace again, that I'd always be running, always looking over my shoulder. And now," he prompted gently. "Now I find myself looking forward instead," she admitted. "Making plans, imagining a future, it's terrifying in its own way." Terrifying how, Theodora's voice caught as she struggled to articulate the fear that still haunted her. "What if it's temporary? What if happiness isn't meant for someone like me?" Matthew's expression grew serious. "What do you mean, someone like you?" Tears welled in Theodora's eyes. "They said I was cursed to be alone," she wept, the old superstition voiced by a fortune teller in New Orleans rising to haunt her. "That anyone who loved me would meet a violent end." Understanding dawned in Matthew's eyes, followed by a fierce determination. He drew her close, his voice rough with emotion. "Then curse me too with you forever." The simple declaration undid her completely. Theodora buried her face against his chest, years of solitude and fear dissolving in his embrace. "I love you, Theodora Jenkins," Matthew whispered against her hair. "Curse or no curse, I choose you. I'll always choose you." She looked up at him, wonder replacing sorrow. "I love you too. I think I have since you offered me that umbrella in the rain and asked nothing in return." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that spoke of promises kept and journeys shared. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, the first stars had appeared in the darkening sky. "Marry me," Matthew said, the words more statement than question. "Build a life with me here or anywhere you want to go." Theodora's answer required no thought, no hesitation. "Yes, here with you." They were married that autumn in Silver Creek's small church, with Thomas and Sarah North, Sheriff Calloway, Mrs. Finch, and Widow Hartley in attendance. Theodora wore a simple cream dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Matthew couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. Their life together unfolded with the rhythms of the seasons, Matthew continuing as deputy while helping his brother with the ranch. Theodora eventually taking over the library when Mrs. Finch retired. They built a small house at the edge of town with a view of the mountains and filled it with books, laughter, and eventually, children, a daughter with Theodora's amber eyes and Matthew's quiet determination, then twin boys who approached life with boundless curiosity. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and they sat together on their porch watching the stars emerge, Theodora would sometimes whisper, "Remember when I thought I was cursed?" Matthew would always draw her closer and reply with a smile, "Best curse I ever shared." For a woman who had once believed herself destined for eternal solitude, Theodora Jenkins North had found the greatest blessing of all, a love strong enough to defy fate itself.